From the top to the bottom. Elizabeth Holmes! That's a name you may have seen or heard on the news. Former CEO of the now-defunct health tech company Theranos, she was at the top of her game less than a decade ago. Inc. Business Magazine called her the next Steve Jobs, and Forbes the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. At age 19, her startup was a unicorn, valued at an estimated $9 billion. But then, it all started to come down, and she is now facing multiple charges for fraud that could lead to 20 years in federal prison. So what happened? How could someone so influential, a serious prospect, and such a promising businesswoman end up crashing to the very bottom? Stay with us until the end to find out. The early years. Let's start from the beginning, shall we? Elizabeth Annie Holmes was born February 3rd of 1984 in Washington, D.C. to parents Noel Ann, a congressional committee staffer, and Christian Rasmus Holmes IV. Mr. Holmes was a former VP at Enron, the energy company, that went down for accounting fraud and went bankrupt in late 2001. That one. It was a big thing. He would also work in many different government agencies such as the EPA and USAID. Interesting guy to choose on their part, but someone's got to do it. While Elizabeth was coursing through her high school years at Houston's St. John's, she became very interested in computer programming and started her first business in which she sold C++ compilers to Chinese universities. So you can kind of see her business mindset from early on. In 2002, she studied chemical engineering at Stanford University, also working as a researcher and lab assistant in the School of Engineering. After her first year, Holmes worked in a laboratory at the Genome Institute of Singapore and tested for SARS-CoV-1, also just referred to as SARS, through the collection of blood samples with syringes. Founding Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes had a mission. She wanted to democratize and change the healthcare system. She was also really scared of needles, so that motivated her to seek a method of doing blood tests by only getting just a little bit from the tip of a finger. When she pitched the idea to her medicine professor Phyllis Gardner at Stanford, he said something like, "Nope, I think that ain't gonna work, kiddo." He wasn't the only one, actually. Many others thought the same. But this wasn't enough to make Elizabeth give up, and she managed to convince Channing Robertson, the dean of the School of Engineering, to back up the idea. So, in 2003, she founded Theranos, a portmanteau of therapy and diagnosis, with Robertson as the first board member. Shortly after, in March 2004, she would drop out of Stanford, using the tuition money as seed funding for the new company. Pretty brave, huh? She was sure she would succeed somehow. Inspired by a genius. Since her beginnings as a businesswoman, Elizabeth Holmes has shown a very blatant admiration for Apple founder Steve Jobs. This was so evident that most times during her public appearances, she used to deliberately imitate not only his style, wearing black turtlenecks as he did, but also his voice and the way he addressed to the public. She would often speak in a deeper tone than her own on special occasions, while maintaining her regular voice when welcoming new interns or talking to fellow employees. Meteoric Rise. Holmes would be able to secure very important and high-profile investors in a short time, like Betsy DeVos, Rupert Murdoch, and even former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. With the early funding, she managed to raise $6.9 million, and the valuation of the company rose to $30 million. After 3 years of early-round fundraising, by 2007 the company would have a valuation of nearly $200 million. In 2009, Holmes' then-boyfriend Ramesh Balwani joined Theranos as its chief operating officer, though he had advised Holmes for many years behind the scenes. By the end of 2010, Theranos filed a U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission form that stated it had raised $45 million by selling equity, options, warrants, and other security rights. This means that the company had more than $92 million in venture capital, and at this point, it was valued at the surprising amount of $1 billion. They were thriving! Time to shine! The rapid growth of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos was soon noticed by very important companies and individuals, and they didn't want to miss the train. In July of 2011, Elizabeth would be introduced to another former Secretary of State, George Shultz, and after a long meeting, probably with lots of expensive snacks, he would join the board of directors. My oh my, Theranos already had probably the most illustrious board in U.S. corporate history, including 3 former U.S. cabinet secretaries, 2 former U.S. senators, a retired Navy admiral, and a retired Marine Corps general. In 2012, the company would move to the former Facebook headquarters in Palo Alto, California. In 2013, after having a stealth mode operation during the first years to focus on the research and the funding, Theranos finally said, "We are here," by unveiling their new website and introducing their product to the world, the Edison machine. The next couple of years would be the greatest for Theranos. In September 2013, they announced their partnership with Walgreens to offer in-store blood tests in more than 40 locations, beginning to reach consumers directly. The next year, after having raised more than $400 million in equity sales, Theranos was now valued at $9 billion, and thanks to Elizabeth having a 50% stake, she was a multi-billionaire. She was at the top of her game, appearing in multiple magazines such as Fortune, Forbes, The New Yorker, etc. Later in March 2015, they partnered up with Cleveland Clinic. 3 months later, they became the lab work provider for Pennsylvania insurers AmeriHealth, Caritas, and Capital Blue Cross. The FDA even approved Theranos' test for detecting herpes, and Joe Biden gave her the thumbs up. What could go wrong, right? Well, everything. The first critics. Though Theranos was receiving all the attention and promised to become a leviathan for innovation, there were many inconsistencies that started to gather up and lead to suspicions. A 2005 article penned by John P.A. Ioannidis, MD in the Journal of the American Medical Association, criticized Theranos for having operated in stealth mode and not publishing any of its research in peer-reviewed medical journals. This was followed shortly by Professor Eleftherios Diamandis of the University of Toronto, concluding that most of the company's claims were exaggerated after examining their technology. However, the big turn for Theranos would come in October, when the Wall Street Journal published John Carreyrow's in-depth expose on the company. The article reported that Theranos was using traditional blood testing machines instead of the company's Edison devices. Claimed to be inaccurate, Carreyrow also interviewed ex-employees that called out the incompetence of the management as well as the deception by the company with their exaggerated claims. Ouch, that gotta hurt. Not all that glitters is gold. With the proof that Theranos was actually too good to be true, to say the least, the downfall was kind of imminent, and they soon started to lose all of their partners and reputation. In November 2015, just a month after the release of Carreyrow's article, Safeway, which invested more than $300 million, decides to dissolve its relationship with Theranos. Shortly after, starting in 2016, the federal regulators of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, report that the company had failed to comply with federal standards and that one of the facilities presented jeopardy to patient health and safety. They gave Theranos only 10 days to address the issue. This led to Walgreens also pulling back and suspending Theranos' services for good. In March 2016, the CMS threatened to ban both Holmes and Balwani from doing any lab business, shortly after the love between them would cease to exist, with Balwani stepping down from the company for good. The fated downfall of Theranos. Holmes and her people were somehow clinging to hope, trying to make things work, but the panorama was terrible, and a positive outcome was escaping like sand from their hands. In July 2016, Holmes got banned from running labs for 2 years as the CMS revokes Theranos' license. Ouch. From October to November, they got sued by investor Partner Fund Management for $96.1 million, claiming security fraud. Then by Walgreens, which sought to recover the $140 million it poured into the company. Bigger ouch! Holmes' net worth went from $4.5 billion to zero, and the company started to downsize and downsize. Theranos' fate was settled. In March 2018, Holmes was charged with massive fraud by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, involving more than $700 million from investors through an elaborate years-long fraud in which they exaggerated or made false statements about the company's technology, business, and financial performance. In June, Holmes and Balwani were indicted on criminal fraud charges. Holmes stepped down as CEO of the company, and on September 4th, Theranos said its final goodbye. Back to the present. US versus Holmes et al. Well, what an absolute disaster. Holmes ended up getting charged with 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, 9 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count for defrauding patients and investors. With the start of the trial getting closer and closer, she had to come out with her defense strategy fast. At first, it was thought that she would seek for a mental disease to justify her actions, but some unsealed documents have revealed that Holmes was possibly the victim of a decade-long campaign of psychological abuse by Balwani, who allegedly controlled what she ate, how long she slept, how she dressed, threw sharp objects at her, and monitored her calls, texts, and emails. And if that wasn't enough, there are reports that her defense team will argue that Holmes didn't commit fraud and that she's just a businesswoman who took part of the fake-it-till-you-make-it culture of Silicon Valley, which would mean that she didn't deceive anyone. She just failed to bring technology into reality. The trial was initially set for July of 2020, but the pandemic didn't really allow that. And that is not all. Holmes announced her pregnancy in March 2021, expecting to give birth in July and delaying the trial even further. A jury of 7 men, 5 women, and other 5 alternatives were selected on September 2nd of 2021. As of September 11th of 2021, reports still confirm that Holmes will argue that she was under the abusive control of Balwani, whose trial will start in 2022. But we'll have to wait and see, as Holmes' trial is expected to last 13 weeks or longer. The highly anticipated trial began on September 8th of 2021 with opening statements. Interested parties will be watching intently to see if Holmes ultimately takes the stand, and as things are currently standing, it's looking like the trial will have lots and lots of drama. So, what do you guys think? Do you think that it was a failure by Holmes, or that she actually committed fraud? Is she a liar? Has she been abused? Is she incompetent? Feel free to write down what you're feeling in the comments, and do not forget to give a like and subscribe.